This video will be a walkthrough through the Gospel of Mark. Um, I expect you to have read the entire Gospel of Mark, and as we go through it, I might skip some things, but I'm going to expect you to have read it thoroughly. It's only 16 chapters. It's the shortest one. I also expect you to look at this chapter 12 PowerPoint where it describes all the things that Jesus did. I'll actually show you exactly where that is, right here. What did Jesus do? And the description of that last week of Jesus's life, which is called the Passion Narrative. All right. So if you're not familiar, with the gospel, make sure you read it and make sure you know that sequence of events. Okay. All right. So in terms of the Gospel of Mark, as we know, there's no birth narrative because he's not apparently interested in it, and he's actually more interested in the end of Jesus's life, or that Passion Week. So some of the themes that I'll be pointing out as I go through the Gospel of Mark is one of the things is a secret revealed through suffering. So it seems like Jesus wants to keep it on the down low in the Gospel of Mark, exactly who he is, until he chooses to reveal who he is. So there's a lot of this like, shh, don't tell anybody, right? He proclaims the gospel by his deeds, not his words. Once again, it's not about who I say I am. It's about the things that I do, okay? And then the narrative is told with urgency, using that word immediately about 40 times. Reason is, he likes to move fast. Mark likes to move very briskly through that gospel and then he only slows down when Jesus enters Jerusalem for that final week. That's why it's often called a passion narrative, the last week of his life, with an extended introduction. Another theme is the disciples are not the brightest bulbs, and frequently Jesus gets very upset with them in the gospel because they just don't get it. It's almost like it's a wonder why he chose these disciples, because they don't seem to understand, and frequently they're kind of discussing amongst themselves, what did he talk? What does he mean? Or who is he? Or, oh no, we're scared. And he occasionally gets frustrated with them because they don't have that faith, in him that they should. And it's odd that they abandon him during his suffering and then are absent. It's only the women when the tomb is open. So they're not the greatest, group of disciples in the Gospel of Mark. That's how they are depicted. Okay, so with that in mind, let us take a look. And honestly, if I don't finish the Gospel of Mark in this recording, I will continue it in the next. So all of the Gospels, even the ones with the birth narratives, have the figure of John the Baptist baptizing Jesus, which is kind of like the first public declaration that here is, the Messiah or the Redeemer. And even John the Baptist, who apparently had a huge following because he was a Nazarite, a sort of a holy man of the wilderness, he had a big following because people were going to him and were being baptized by him and kind of saw him as a Messiah figure. But he says, the one who's more powerful than I is coming after me. I'm not worthy to stoop down and untie the thong of his sandals. So he's saying, sure, you can be following me, but the one who is more worthy, I'm just a precursor to that person. And then all of a sudden, Jesus of Nazareth comes out. He is baptized, and then God comes down speaks down from heaven. You are my son, the beloved, with you I am well pleased. So, that's kind of like his public introduction to everyone. And then if you notice, by the end of chapter 1, a lot of stuff has happened. Like Jesus spends about 40 days in the wilderness being tempted by Satan. The other Gospels have a very lengthy story there where Satan tempts Jesus and there's like a back and forth. Here, because Mark likes to, move things along, he just says he was in the wilderness for 40 days, tempted by Satan. He was with the wild beasts and the angels waited. And then he comes back. So it's kind of like we want to ask Mark, wait, what is this Satan thing? What happened with this? But he's just moving along, right? It's not relevant to the story. So he just moves along. Then he says, now after John was arrested, what are you talking about? What was John arrested for? moving along. That's what Mark goes. Let's just keep going. So he gathers his disciples, and then they go to Capernaum. He's teaching them. Um, he heals a person with an unclean spirit. He says, "Come out of him." The unclean spirit, convulsing him, crying out, came out. They're all amazed. Who is this? This new teacher with authority. And then his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. Then he heals more people, gathers more disciples. Um, when they go out, he's praying on a deserted place, and the disciples come and say, "Wow, everyone's looking for you. Let's go to the neighborhood towns so we could proclaim the message there also, because that's what I want to do." So he starts going around to the neighboring towns. By the end of chapter 1, Jesus could no longer go into a town openly because so many people were following him, but stayed out in the country, and people came to him from every quarter. So see how rapidly that happens? By the end of chapter 1, he has been baptized. God says he's the Son of God. He has gathered all his disciples. He has healed. He has preached. So many people know him that he has to actually stay out of town. And then he's been tempted by the wilderness, and apparently John got arrested. So all of this happens very quickly by the end of chapter 1, which is quite amazing. Capernaum is a kind of a neighbor, one of the cities up in the Galilee area. So then he heals a paralyzed man. And some of the scribes, remember how I said the teachers of the text, or the rabbis or scribes, those are the Pharisees saying, "Hey, how can this person do something like that?" Right? Because this guy is amazing. And he says, "Hey, are you talking to me? Why do you raise such questions in your heart?" Which is easier to say to the paralytic, "Your sins are forgiven," or to say, "Stand up and take your mat and walk"? So he says, "Now that you know that the Son of Man," remember how I said he likes to refer to himself as that, "has authority on the earth to forgive sins, I say to you, stand up and take your mat." So because he's challenging the scribes of the day, the Pharisee of the day, and then later on the Herodians are actually the Romans, they immediately, very quickly start to plot against him. You notice that he is interacting with all sorts of people who are considered unclean, like the people who were sick, a paralyzed man. Here's Levi, the tax collector. No one likes the tax collector, but he says, "Follow me," right? Many people think that Levi, son of Alphaeus, is actually Matthew, the author of Matthew. Here he is sitting at dinner, which is a very kind of dangerous activity because you're eating and consuming, and lots of kind of germs can float around. He is sitting with tax collectors and sinners because he includes everyone. So remember, he was one of the most inclusive people. He did not judge according to, the matters of holiness that the old scriptures would talk about. This person can't be here, this person can't be there. He included everyone. So he's plucking heads of grain during the Sabbath, so the Pharisees are very upset that he's working on the Sabbath. So he's doing a lot of things to kind of piss the people off at this point. Another guy had this is in chapter 3, a withered hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately conspired with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. So by chapter 3, there's already talk between the Pharisees and the Romans, the Herodians, on how to trap Jesus of Nazareth and get him out of the picture. So see how fast it's working, right? Then, because he needs to move very quickly, he appoints his 12 disciples and gives them the power to heal and to preach, and he sends them home. He sends them out so that they can do more work as well. This is an interesting issue here. This is in chapter 3, verse 31. His mother and his brothers came, and they sent to him and called him, and a crowd was sitting around and said, "Hey, your mother and your brothers and sisters are outside asking for you." And he said, "Who are my mothers and brothers? You guys are my family," right? That has been an actually tricky text for a lot of biblical scholars because they like to elevate Mary, the Mother of God, as being the Virgin Mary. And the idea that she actually was a normal person who had normal sex and clearly had at least 4 other children, right? Because your mother and your brothers and sisters, plural, so at least 2 brothers, 2 sisters, that she had sex and had normal children and had a family. Sometimes some Christian groups didn't like that idea, especially some Catholic groups, because they like to see her as the Virgin Mary. So there was talk of editing that sentence out, but fortunately they included it because they trust us, the readers, to figure out or to even care, what exactly does being a virgin mean, right? I think once you give birth, you're probably not a virgin anymore. One of the things that is kind of characteristic, and this is throughout all of the Gospels of Jesus, and pretty unique because you really don't have descriptions of this from other people, is the use of the parable. Now, the parable is a short story that Jesus would use as a device that would force the audience to come to a realization. So parables aren't things that happened to Jesus. Parables are stories that Jesus told in order to get a point across. So, for example, the parable of the sower, if you read it carefully, he says, listen, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seed fell on the path, other seed fell on the rocky grounds. Basically the seeds fell in different types of places. And only the seed that fell into good soil and brought forth grain, growing up and increasing and yielding 30 and 60 and 100-fold. And he said, let anyone with ears to hear listen. It's essentially saying, when I preach, if my words fall on the ears that have faith, then you will have faith, you will spread that faith, and it will grow. If it falls on deaf ears, then you're not going to get it, right? So it really needs to take root. These words that he's teaching, you really need to take root in order to instill that faith. That's the messaging about planting the seed, okay? So the use of the parable, fantastic, using language of the audience, of course. When he was alone, those who were around him, along with the 12, asked him about the parables, and he gets a little frustrated, like, to you has been given the secret of the kingdom of God. For those outside, everything comes in parables. Listen, buddies. Hey, disciples, you should really know what I'm talking about, right? He says, do you not understand this parable? How are you even going to understand any parables if you don't understand this one, which is pretty obvious? So this is once again a great example of that Mark theme where the disciples apparently don't understand what he's saying, even though we, the reader, actually do. So the kind of unknowingness of the disciples, right? So here he is here's another one about the parable of the mustard seed, right? Here, and then with many such parables, he spoke the words to them as they were able to hear them. But everything else, of course, he had to explain privately to his disciples because they didn't know. He also could do miracles with nature, like producing fishes and loaves for food and also stilling, a storm. So he could do a lot. I would look at that lengthy paragraph about all the things that he does. He heals a demoniac. This is a great story. This is a story of basically a woman and a child, and both of them were unable to fulfill their true womanly duties. The first one because she was bleeding for 12 years, meaning she was probably menstruating for 12 years, and the other one who at the age of 12, before she could menstruate, died. So in both cases, both women were stripped of their potential to have children. So I would look at this story pretty carefully because the hemorrhaging woman and the child who is dead, the number 12 is significant. She died before she could have her period and have children. And this woman was bleeding for 12 years, so she was unable to have children. They're clearly set in parallel with each other. They're both unclean. They're both women. And yet Jesus rewards the hemorrhaging woman for touching him, saying, that was great that you did that. I heal you. And he heals the 12-year-old in order for both of them to fulfill their destiny as having children. We'll continue next time.